Did you see those dramatic lights? The budget has increased by $5 for Apologia. Isn't it so good to be back? Come on, everybody, welcome back. Yeah. Well, if you missed me as much as I missed you, I don't have another part to that line, but it's really good to see all of your smiling faces. If this is your first time at Apologia, we're genuinely and sincerely really happy to have you here. However, I recognize a lot of faces, so I have a feeling that quite a few of you have been here before. Just by a show of hands, who has never been to an Apologia before? Oh, look at this. That's awesome. Welcome. I'm the court jester, I mean MC for this program. On behalf of my wife, this is part of the marital duties to host this event, and I have a good time. Hopefully you will as well tonight. So for those who this is your first time, Apologia is a really simple format. Essentially, it will be a 2-hour conversation, which sounds like a lot, but we break it down into 2 halves. So the first half, we'll have Pastor Alec and Pete just have a fireside chat right behind me. During that time, you probably are going to have different ideas or different questions in your head. And the cool thing is we want you to text those in. So you can text your questions to 844-773-0530. So any question that arises as a result of the conversation, text those questions in, because what we do is at the top of the next hour, we take a 10 or 15-minute break. So you can go visit all of the booths, take a creature comfort break, and then we sift through all of the questions. I was trying to figure out a nice way to say that. I didn't know what to say there. So what we do is we take all the questions and we present them to Pete, and we try to cover as many of the questions as we can in the second hour. So the second hour is totally unscripted. It's really driven by what you guys send in, and hopefully will facilitate another great conversation. During that break, I encourage you to visit the booths. Hopefully you have, but if you haven't, we have 4 booths for tonight. So the first booth I want to call out is the main point of discussion for tonight is Pete Hegseth and his perspective as being a former military guy and also being a host on Fox News, just having a perspective on the state of the military. In fact, his book is out at the book table. We only have, I think, 30 copies left. It's $20. We don't make any money off of it. We're just trying to represent spreading basically his message that we're going to talk about tonight. So please make sure you stop by the book table. Also, we have the 40 Days for Life table. Between September 25th and November 3rd, they are going to host a peaceful, prayerful vigil for changing hearts and minds about abortion. Their biggest thing is just they want other people to join them really just in prayer, that people would continue to uphold and rise up the value of life. Their theme is give an hour and be changed. I think that's pretty cool. Secondly, we have a school board advocacy group just right out there. Very, very simple. They're not looking for you to speak up at a school board meeting. They're not looking for you to be on the front page of a viral TikTok video. All they're looking for is people to come alongside of them and simply sit with them in a school board meeting. Small fact, for the Edmonds and Shoreline School District, the average number of people that attend a school board meeting, 15. 15. So when this group goes with 5 people, let's do some math there. That's 25% increase, right? Is my math right? That's 25% increase. And all they're looking for is literally just a couple more people to join them as a presence to say, on behalf of conservative values and on behalf of Christian parents, we're here to let it be known that we care about what the school board does and the decisions that they make on behalf of our kids. I think that that's pretty cool. They have a schedule of all of the different school board meetings that are coming up. Would encourage you to stop by that table. Lastly, probably the table that's been here the longest is FPIW. For those of you who probably, like myself, are thinking, I don't know anything about politics, I don't understand what goes on in Olympia, no problem. They know all the things that you need and you want to know. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to stop by the table, and the biggest thing they want to emphasize is to get out and to vote, to sign up, to register to vote, and to let our voices be heard. I was going to hold on to this stat until the intermission, but it's too compelling not to share. In Washington State, at the last major election cycle, 900,000 Christians chose not to vote. Almost 1 million votes of the Christian conservative voice chose to abstain and not let their voice be heard. I would argue one of the reasons our state is in the state that it's in is because we're not using our God-given right and what our soldiers fought so hard for, which is the right to vote. So speaking of soldiers who fought really hard for our freedoms, it's my pleasure to introduce Pete Hegseth. Whether it's the battlefield, the media, or national politics, Pete has been a passionate fighter for America and the freedoms we love. He's a decorated war fighter, Princeton and Harvard grad, a veterans and military advocate. He's a highly acclaimed author, Fox News host, political analyst. I don't even know how he has time to come here, but we're really glad that he made time to come here tonight. Can you give a warm welcome to Pete Hegseth and Pastor Alec Rollins?
Well, it's good to see you all here. Welcome to APOLOGIA, our forum that we have here at Westgate. Really, our desire is that we would be, for these events, a rallying point for the Christians of this region, realizing that you don't have always a lot to rally to. So this is a great opportunity, and welcome Pete Hegseth to APOLOGIA. Glad to have you back.
Oh, it's great to be back. It feels... Pastor, well, thank you for having me again. For those, I know there are a lot of first-time attendees, but this is actually my third time here. So Michael, Catherine, everybody that's been, it feels, it's starting to feel a little bit like home. I love it. No, it's a wonderful tradition. I fly after the show, this 6-hour flight, drive through Seattle, which is a beautiful time, especially this time of year. But it is, I'm so grateful for what you do here, in this city, in this place, with this intentionality. I was saying to my wife on the drive in here, I said, I go to a lot of events, you don't know what to expect, you don't know where you're walking in, and here, I know exactly the wonderful people that I'm working with, the mission that you're undertaking, and the great people we get a chance to meet with. So it is an absolute honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, actually, we've also watched you on Fox, and it's been fun since first identifying you when you had, or maybe still have your own show that you record. But now we're seeing you, we watched you interviewing Levine with his book, and seeing you on more and more shows. So it looks like your visibility is on the rise.
Well, that just means there's more problems in the country. Things get worse. Unfortunately, it's better for cable news. That's not my goal. I mean, listen, I am grateful and blessed to be at Fox. It's a place where I take very seriously the platform as a man of faith, as a veteran, to try to do right by what I believe and the people that I've served with, and Fox gives me an opportunity to do that. So whether it's faith and the life of Jesus that we do on Fox Nation, or Modern Warriors on Fox Nation, a series where we talk to vets of our generation, or the Miseducation of America, our series about what's happening in K through 12 schools. There aren't many, in mainstream corporate media, there are no other places at that level where those conversations are had at all. Thankfully, there are podcasts, there's some other channels, there's some other places where it happens, and I'm grateful for those places too. But Fox is still right there on the front lines when you look at national media, and thankfully they give us that opportunity.
Yeah. And several other voices, as well as yours, really are sort of our champions. I know there's some criticism that's sometimes leveled against some of the guests, some of the hosts, but for the most part, some of the other hosts that you have there are really voices for us.
Well, let me say, nowhere's perfect. No one works at a perfect place. But I'll say this: no one at Fox has ever told me what I can and cannot say. And listen, we've prayed live on air. We've talked about, read Bible verses, talked openly about Jesus Christ, my Christian faith, the belief that we need Christ back at the center of our nation, that we were founded as a Christian nation. Those are things we are able to and willing to talk about regularly on the air to audiences of millions of people. And when I'm done, no one goes, oh, Pete, you really should stop talking about that Christian stuff. They say, hey, if that's where your heart is, your job is to communicate and provide insight to people, and you speak on behalf of a lot of people who feel that very same way. That's why Fox's ratings are so good, is because we speak for forgotten men and women, for people from my hometown, in small town Minnesota, where I grew up, who feel like who know that the corporate elite media despises what they believe. We feel very differently at Fox. At least I know I do, and a lot of our colleagues, and to have that opportunity is a blessing.
That's wonderful. Thank you. The first 2 times you were here, you concentrated with us on the educational system and how it's been being undermined for centuries now. Today, I'd like to talk about your new book, The War on Warriors. So can we start with what made you sign up for the military?
I was not from a military family. I grew up, I had a couple of, both my grandpas served in the sort of peacetime after World War II, and our families were very proud of that. My family's from Wanamingo, Minnesota. It's a small farming town in southern Minnesota. You blink and you miss it. But I'll never forget as a kid going to the Memorial Day parade. And I mean this. There's a few memories you have as a kid that are very formative for you. And I remember, it's a no stoplight, 1 stop sign town. It's a 4-minute parade. It's like the mayor, the sheriff, the band, and like the 8 vets. And it would be the World War II vets and the Korean War vets and then the Vietnam vets and then the Gulf War vets who actually still fit into their uniforms. It's true. And they're walking down Main Street, and everybody in town is there. I mean, everybody in town is like 300 people, but everybody in town is there. And the reverence that they showed for those men walking down Main Street, it hit me like a thud. Like, well, if they were willing to do that, I should someday be willing to do that. I think I'd like to do that. They seem to have done something special and something important. And it was a real imprint on me when I was 11 and 12 and 13 and 14. And every year, because it was Memorial Day, it wasn't about the vets in the middle of the street. We went down to Memorial Park in Wanamingo, Minnesota, and honored those that never came home. And if you add up all the Wanamingo, Minnesotas across the country, you start to get a small sense of the depth of sacrifice that was required to maintain our republic. And so I applied to West Point, and I got in, but I also really only cared about basketball. It's a long story. And I thought Princeton's basketball team was better, and so I went to Princeton, but I did ROTC there. And that's why I'm a big believer in civic ritual. I'm a big believer in ceremonies, in parades, in things that you can bring your kids to, because you can talk at them all you want, or you can hope they see a movie, or they're moved by something they learn in history class. But what we honor, what we celebrate, is a reflection of what we value. And so when kids see that, it's just like taking your kids to church. It's like seeing the proactive measures you take on Memorial Day or the 4th of July, or how you manifest faith in your family impacts kids. So that's what it was for me. It was straight up patriotism. Hey, and I joined right before 9/11, and then of course 9/11 was the ultimate validator of that.
I want to jump to a line, and if you were at Westgate this morning, I mentioned that I want to jump to a line that stood out to me in all of your books, marvelous book. But the line was somewhere in your military career, and I'd like you to go over with us some of your tours of service. But somewhere in there, a friend of yours or an acquaintance who had served in Vietnam said to you, Pete, don't miss your war. Tell us what that meant in terms of military service, and I may comment on what it means to me spiritually.
Absolutely. When I was about 18 years old, I remember it was a Vietnam vet who someone set up a lunch with because I was kind of interested in joining the military, and I knew nothing about the military. I didn't know the difference between the Army and the Marine Corps. Sorry. I do now. Soldiers can read. No, I'm just kidding. Come on. My brother-in-law's a Marine. He's a great guy. And I remember he told me this. He said, "Don't miss your war." And I'm like, "Whoa, this guy is crazy." I mean, I had never really encountered this sort of the gravity with which he had said that and what it meant. And then after a couple of tours, I did a tour in Guantanamo Bay. I did a combat tour in Iraq, and it eventually, over time, I understood what he meant, which is if you're a young, capable man in a country and you love that country, and you're in the middle of a conflict, or you see something that you can do on behalf of your country or on behalf of your faith, so there's other contexts for all of this. Yeah. You're gonna regret if you miss your war. You're gonna look back, and I'm not just saying it in service in the military. I actually think there is a lot of that, and that's okay, and I don't bemoan anybody who did or didn't serve. My dad would have been the best first sergeant or master sergeant you've ever seen in the world. He can organize anything, and he's the most disciplined man I've ever met. You know, he grew up on a farm, and he's a great athletic director and a great man of faith and did wonderful things. But in the back of his mind, sometimes he's like, "Man, I would have been a good soldier." And I'm like, "Dad, I know you would have." But he was coming on Vietnam, and it wasn't the thing. And anyway, don't miss your war in whatever context that is in. That thing in the back of your head that says, there's a fight out there that I should be a part of. And maybe it's school boards right now, like was just mentioned at the beginning. Or maybe it's putting on a uniform as a young kid. And that's what I grapple with in the book is I have 5 sons. The oldest is 14, the youngest is 6. The question I had to ask myself in the book is, would I want my kids to wear the uniform or not? And that's the last chapter of the book is a letter to my sons about whether I would want them to. And I waited until the end to write that chapter. I wrote the whole book because I didn't know what to say in the letter. I really didn't, because we have, the military's got a serious public relations problem. That's why people are not wanting to join. It's deeper than public relations. So I believe I would want my kids to find that next war, but will it be the military? I don't know. It depends on what future administrations do to reverse a lot of the trends that are terrible trends that have happened inside our military.
Yeah. So talk to us in a little bit more detail about your terms of your service. You saw combat.
Sure.
in Iraq.
Yeah, I was an infantry officer, commissioned into the National Guard, which is the contract that I had signed originally. I did a deployment to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for a year in 2004 to 2005. There were 700 detainees, Al-Qaeda types that had been pulled off the battlefield in Afghanistan. And we were the quick reaction force inside the prison. We did towers and gates and transfers of detainees back and forth. That was when we thought there'd be a military tribunal and commissions to try these guys, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is still sitting there today. So back then we thought we'd have swift resolution on these things. Of course we didn't. I came home, and the story's in the book the book's not about my military experience, but I weave a lot of it into it. I was able to attach myself to the 101st Airborne for their combat tour to Iraq in 2005 and 2006. I knew a commander in that unit. They needed a platoon leader. I was able to get there. And so I led a platoon in Iraq and Baghdad for 5 or 6 months. And then I was in Samarra. If you remember when the Golden Dome was blown up, Al-Qaeda blew up a Shia shrine in Samarra, and it triggered a lot of the sectarian violence that happened in Iraq. That was my second day on the job in Samarra as the liaison to the local government in Samarra. So we spent 5-6 months all over that city. What was actually a terrible tragedy for that country was a huge opportunity for our fight against Al-Qaeda in Samarra. And then I did a couple of other things, and I did a tour in Afghanistan in 2011, 2012. I was a senior counterinsurgency instructor in Kabul, so it was not a combat tour, although we had some things happen outside our base, and like a lot of people did. But my job was to train the troops coming into the country right before they went to their sector. So my job was to understand what the Taliban strategy was, what their tactics were, how they were manipulating the population, what were they doing in the economy, in the shadow courts, inside the Afghan National Police and the Afghan National Army, so that when guys were coming into country and they're like, okay, you're assigned to the eastern region or the southern region of Afghanistan, we had to give them the latest and greatest of what the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were doing. And that was, I went into Iraq pessimistic and came out optimistic, and I went into Afghanistan, came into it optimistic and left pessimistic, and we can talk about all of that. But all of those experiences certainly informed, I'm grateful for everyone I'm grateful for every opportunity. I regret nothing. I will never forget all the people that I served with, but it also gave me an incredible view into the dysfunction of the Defense Department, how we use our men and women on the battlefield, and the disconnect between Washington, D.C.'s view of the war and the people who are fighting it, all of which kind of informed this book.
Yeah. So some of the impetus from the book, after extensive service that you've just described to us, some of the impetus for the book is that you have been labeled an extremist by some of the folks who you served for.
Correct. So the one thing I didn't mention is that kind of my final deployment was in Washington, D.C., and the whole story's in the book about how I got there. I was supposed to serve, I work at Fox, it's in New York City. I was supposed to serve in the New York National Guard, a unit I had been in before. I knew the battalion commander. He wanted me to have a slot in his unit. It made sense. I work close to my home. That unit gets a capable soldier. Well, the word of me being attached to the unit got all the way up to Governor Cuomo's desk. Not kidding. And Cuomo was like, Hegseth will not serve in the New York National Guard. So already, why? Because I work at Fox, or because I support Trump, or what? I deployed to Afghanistan under Obama. I volunteered to go to Afghanistan under Obama. I didn't vote for Obama. I didn't support anything he ever did. I also served under Bush. Now I'm serving under Trump, and I'm not good enough for the New York National Guard? Okay. So I found a unit in Washington, D.C. that would take me, because I wanted to continue to serve. And what happened, obviously, you had the George Floyd riots of May of 2020. I'm in the unit. I was there night 2, so I wasn't there the first night when it all kind of happened spontaneously. That's when, remember the insurrection they mounted against Donald Trump's White House? When they burned down the church and they defaced the statue and they bum rushed the gates. I think there were 60 Secret Service agents or other police officers, like, badly injured that night when they were fighting back these Antifa, BLM punks that were outside the White House. We showed up that next day and were there for the next 3 or 4 nights. It's probably the most surreal experience I've ever had, is standing outside the White House with a riot shield. You have Jersey barriers and concertina wire, and you're staring out at fellow Americans that are throwing water bottles and bricks and stuff at you, and you're looking back and it's the White House. You think, like, how, and I describe it in the book, the most vile things you've ever heard said, the most racist things you've ever heard said from BLM activists, especially at the black soldiers that we serve with in the DC National Guard, because it's a very diverse National Guard. And it described sort of understanding the amount of restraint that those soldiers had to show. So I was there for that, and I go into detail about that. It was fine, we did our thing. Well, then January 6th happened, and I was actually there reporting on that rally that morning for Fox and Friends. So I was there, and I described it on the ground as a constitutional tinderbox, which is what it felt like, and obviously eventually what it looked like. So my unit got mobilized to guard the inauguration. You remember after January 6th? Nancy Pelosi had 25,000 National Guardsmen sleeping in the parking garage. Everybody was there. So if you were in the DC Guard, you were going to be there for the inauguration of Joe Biden. My unit knew that I worked on the weekends in New York hosting a show, so they accommodate that. But they said, like everybody else, Pete, we'll have you there from Monday to Friday during the inauguration to help guard it. I'm like, great, that's my job. I had orders cut and everything else. Well, the day before I was to drive down to DC and do that duty, I get a call from a senior officer in my unit. And all he said was, Major, we don't need you. You can stand down. Your orders are revoked. You're good to go. Don't worry. He was kind of cool, he was cool about it. He was like, hey, don't worry about it. We're good. I'm like, what do you mean don't worry about it? Everybody is deployed. And I had orders. He said, nope, you're off the hook. You're good to go. And he wouldn't tell me why. I had a sense why. And so, at that point I was like, I see the writing on the wall. I'm done. So I voluntarily separated from the military after that because I had a sense of what was happening. Well, as of the writing of the book, I called this guy back, and he was willing to talk to me. And he said, I know with 99.9% certainty, because I was on the emails and in the meetings, the reason your orders were revoked is because you were deemed an extremist. You were deemed a white nationalist and a potential threat. And I said, why? They said, because of a tattoo I have on my chest of a Jerusalem cross. A lot of you probably are familiar with the Jerusalem cross. It's a religious symbol, has nothing to do with white nationalism, has to do with my Christian faith. And officers inside the unit pointed that out, but the other officers who trolled my social media to look at my tattoos had decided that I was an extremist and that out of precaution, my order should be revoked. So was it because of my tattoo? Was it because I work at Fox? Was it because I'm a Trump supporter? What was it? Well, none of those are good answers. It was because the military had decided to target things like their definition of patriot extremism or other forms of extremism. So it was my personal confrontation with the purge that we've started to see of Christians, of people of conscience, with the COVID vaccine and other things inside our military. It's not how I wanted to end my career, but I just step back and I go, I did the better part of 20 years, not 20 years total, but over the course of 20 years. I did 3 tours. I went wherever Uncle Sam wanted me to go. And then I can't guard an inauguration because I have a Christian tattoo. Like this is, I mean, take a symbol like the Gadsden flag, and we can get into all of this. You can't even have a Gadsden flag bumper sticker on your car anymore on military posts because this is the "Don't Tread on Me" flag. Because under the Obama administration, but then the Biden administration, they've deemed symbols like that to be extremist symbols. They're looking for certain type of people to join and excluding others. So I go on, but examples, that is not the military I joined in 2003. And when you talk to people who are serving, they will tell you the same thing. I joined and it looked like one military. It wasn't a perfect military, but by the time you get to what happened under Obama and Biden, there's a whole different set of prerogatives and priorities that have changed the nature of that military and made us far less capable.
So what happened at the highest level to begin that unraveling? When did it begin, and where did it come from?
Yeah, the whole story is in the book. The previous book I wrote is called Battle for the American Mind. It's about how the progressive left took over K through 12 education. And when you dig into that story, it's a 100-year story, and they've captured all the commanding heights of education. Government schools are run by the hard left today, across the board. Whether you live here or in Tennessee, the hard left controls them because they've captured all those institutions. And so changing education, you're not going to be able to do that with the flip of a switch, which is why my recommendation is save your kids, take them out of government schools, find another way to fortify them. And then we fight for school choice and other opportunities for families to have those same opportunities. Changing the Defense Department or the Pentagon is totally different. I mean, thankfully, the takeover of this institution is not 100 years old. It's basically 20, 25. I mean, there's some things that happened after Vietnam. There's some things that happened under Jimmy Carter. But for the most part, you're looking at something that started under Barack Obama in earnest, was put on pause under Donald Trump, because they kind of went underground, and then accelerated quickly under Joe Biden. And the institution of the Pentagon is different than education in that it is a top-down institution. So if you want to change it, you very intentionally place leaders at the top of it who reflect your politically correct or social justice mantras, and they do your bidding for you. So Barack Obama was famously very distrustful of the military. We knew that. But he also spent a lot of time there, and it spent a lot of energy there. Why is that? Because the military represented the last meritocracy in America that the left didn't control. All the other big bureaucracies in Washington, D.C. were basically already at the heel of the left. Not the military, which proudly was nonpartisan for the most part, and charged with winning our wars and keeping us free and secure at home. Barack Obama distrusted that and ultimately worked very hard over time to place secretaries of the different branches. Obviously, a Secretary of Defense, change out the chairmen of the Joint Chiefs, so that over time, all the independent-minded, constitutional oath-type warfighters were slowly shown the door, and the politically correct social justice crowd that was willing to do the bidding on gender, willing to do the bidding on trans, willing to do the bidding on climate change, willing to do the bidding on extremism, they were the ones that were slowly pushed to the top, which is why you see things like women in combat. Barack Obama didn't try to do women in combat or trans in the military in 2008. He couldn't do it. The institution would have rejected his attempts to do that. He did all those things in 2014, 2015, and 2016 after he had put in place people willing to do the bidding on that. And so what the Defense Department has been and is supposed to be is a meritocracy focused on readiness and lethality. I just want the biggest, baddest dudes that can kill the enemy, right? I don't care anything. I actually don't care about anything else. I don't care where you grew up. I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't care if you're black or white. I don't even care if you're a male or female, but I do care about your physical differences between males and females. I care about none of those things. When I was serving, I served with blacks, Hispanics, rich kids, poor kids, country kids, city kids, and the point was you all got the same bad haircut. And I know this is kind of a bad haircut too. We'll see if it stays. You get the same bad haircut, you put the same uniform on, you get the same training, and you learn to work as a unit. Your individuality is stripped out of you intentionally because on the battlefield, in my platoon, you are not an individual. You are part of a unit dedicated to the same mission together. So when I hear the dumbest phrase in the military today is our diversity is our strength. It's the exact opposite. But those types of slogans were peddled, started, and pushed under Obama. Our diversity is our strength. We need our ranks to reflect different. Our ranks already reflected a cross-section of America, people who wanted a better life, up and out, from wherever they are. I served with just incredible people. But the focus became we need diversity for diversity's sake, or we need women for women's sake. And the rest of us step back and say, well, I just want the best fighting force, and that's not good enough for the progressive left, which wants to undermine these institutions. So I can give you an example, if you'd like, of one thing in particular, but they started seeding it at the top, and then they started changing the institutions at the bottom, meaning who are we recruiting and how are we recruiting, and then what are we doing in our military academies? So they pushed a lot of civilian professors into military academies. It started before Obama, but they pushed very hard, even more so under Obama, so that our West Points and our Annapolises started to look more like Harvard than the 101st Airborne. And so you get the same squishy, soft, left-wing views on military academies that you do in other colleges and universities, which is how you start to raise up young lieutenants who peddle the same DEI, CRT, gender, climate nonsense as their superior officers. And then the squeeze is on, right? Over time, you got indoctrinated young people who've gone through colleges and universities, and then you have cowards with stars on their shoulders in the Pentagon who are willing to do the bidding of politicians, who are pushing things that they know are wrong. I believe in civilian leadership of the military. Everybody does. But if you're wearing a uniform and you know a civilian is pushing a dangerous Marxist ideology into the military, or they're eroding standards intentionally, it is your constitutional duty to do something about that. And they didn't. Which, in closing on this answer, which is why this book is not about how the military went woke. This is a book about how the military allowed itself to go woke. Because it was men and women in leadership positions who did not stand up when they should have, and the institution suffered as a result.
Unpack the word meritocracy and how it applies in the military.
Well, I mean, meritocracy, the best place to look at meritocracy in America today is what you saw on your screens today on Fox and CBS in the NFL, right? I mean, if I decided that I wanted to play in the NFL right now, there's no chance. The fastest, strongest, smartest guys that can read defenses, that can body slam people, that can weave a pass 25 yards down the line to a receiver coming across the middle, they get paid. And they keep their job. And sometimes people get injured. And when they get injured, what happens? They get replaced. Because the world is a harsh place. A coach has all this promise, loses for a couple of seasons, what happens to him? He gets fired. Okay? You lose a few games, you're the starting quarterback, you're replaced by the backup. And what do the fans have an expectation of? Winning! If you're not winning, you're out. And we'll cheer for you for a while, and you know what? I'm from Minnesota, so I'm stuck with the Vikings forever. I'm stuck. Sam Darnold. And if you're from Seattle, then you're stuck with, well, we're all stuck with the United States military. See, that's the thing. There's no other institution to turn to. So I want an institution, a meritocracy, that is focused on one thing: winning. Deterring first, if and when possible. The whole point is not to fight wars. But when necessary, fighting and winning the wars. Being the most violent, lethal force we are better at deterring and killing the enemy than anyone else on the planet. That's all I care about. Anybody that tells you that the military is for anything else is A, a liar, and B, is going to get people killed. And that's exactly what this administration and the Obama administration have done. Take, for example, the ultimate betrayal of meritocracy, at least the most prominent beginning of that betrayal happened at the end of the Obama administration. And it happened with the pushing of women in combat. I serve with a lot of amazing female soldiers that do great things. And because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, women found their way in combat. We had something called forward support companies where tactical units needed more support further out. So you started attaching logistics units to combat units, right? And they'd serve on bases together. So you'd have women logisticians or mechanics who are traveling in convoys and would find themselves getting hit in Iraq and Afghanistan between bases. And there's some famous incidents of that I write about in the book. They found themselves in combat. So it became, what you started to hear on Capitol Hill is, well, women are already in combat. Well, it was, yes, but that was as out of necessity, not necessarily out of intentionality. But the Obama administration took it to the next level and said, no, we need women in combat units. And they basically, through executive order, Obama said, we want this to happen. But first they said, we'll do a study. We'll do studies. Well, fine. The Army and the Air Force just laid down. They didn't even try to really do a study. To the credit of the Marine Corps, hoorah. I actually, if I could tell my kids to join one branch right now, it'd probably be the Marine Corps. So, and I mean that. Because they actually try to uphold the ethos more than anybody else. They're not perfect, but more than anybody else. Marine Corps did a study. 400 male Marines in one unit, 300 male Marines, and 100 female Marines in the other. And they simulated combat experiences over the course of months. Let's just see how they operate. And what do you think happened? The 400 male Marines smoked the other unit. All right. And what did the mixed unit lead in? Sexual assault incidents and injuries. No, it's what happened over time. The press didn't really know what to do with it, so they wrote these sort of fake nuanced articles about how, but they were good at this. All the data was clear when it came to the core tasks, tactical tasks, the all-male units were far better. And what did Ray Mabus, he was the Secretary of the Navy, do with that report? Threw it in the garbage. And the Obama administration said, women in combat units now. And the Army and the Marine Corps started to say, well, what do we do with the standards? And soldiers and Marines would ask, what are we doing about the standards? And the generals would say, we have quotes on this, well, the standards aren't changing. They're just evolving. This is how they do it. And so they start to have gender-specific standards, lower for women than for men, but into the same units. We've got story after story about places like Ranger School or Airborne School, where there are certain standards which have traditionally always been there if you want to be a Ranger, but they started to change. Because a general would show up at training and they'd say, why aren't more women passing this course? And what does a question from a general in the military mean? It's an order. A question is not a question. It's a next time I show up here, Captain, there better be more women passing this course. And so get rid of this run over here or lower this standard over here. Mark Milley was himself calling down to Army Ranger units asking why they didn't have female company commanders. What is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs doing talking at the company level about whether there's a male or a female? So it all becomes about what they can say about what's in the force. Then you add on top of that trans stuff. I do a whole chapter on, the chapter for trans soldiers is called The Real Special Forces. I couldn't resist. For that example, when you join the military and you go to basic training, you can't take your inhaler. Do you know why? Because you might not have your inhaler in combat. Or when I deployed with a lot of guys who had really bad toothaches. Do you know why? Because if the Army decided you had a dental issue, you know what they did? They just yanked it. No Novocaine, just, and you get on the plane, you're going to Iraq. But at least in Iraq, you're not going to have a toothache and have to deal with a dentist. Because there isn't a dentist in Iraq to help you with that. So there's a logic to these things. Yet, under Obama and Biden, we're allowing men to join the military with the explicit purpose of transitioning to become a female, at which point they're completely chemically dependent on these things, not able to train and not able to deploy. And we sign them up in order to allow them to do that. None of that has to do with readiness. None of it has to do with meritocracy. None of it has to do with lethality. It has to do with political prerogatives from people in Washington, D.C. And when I talk, so the secret sauce of this book was not my experience. It was, I've through my platform at Fox, have gotten to know, obviously tons and tons of vets and people serving. Because there are no vets really in the media for the most part in news. So when there's a big story, you should see my inbox and my text. It's like every guy I've served with and every guy they know who knows a guy and their neighbor are texting me, did you get this? Did you think about this? And I love it because it helps me make sure I'm over the target of what I'm talking about. But because of that network, I got to talk to dozens and dozens and dozens of active service members who spoke on the condition of anonymity to me off the record. So I'm in New York. I'm stuck in New York every weekend. All Saturday, I'm just on the phone talking to guys. And the same themes came up. Commanders, we're walking on eggshells. We're walking on eggshells about standards. Because if I enforce a standard because of, I might be called a racist, or I might be called a sexist, or I'm not being respectful of their chosen gender and sexuality, or can I even talk about faith? When you're walking on eggshells as a commander, you can't make life or death decisions or train people properly in that context. So I knew this. The response I've gotten from this book has been 99% positive from people serving or vets, because I knew exactly what they're experiencing. The only criticism I've gotten are from wokesters who want the military to be less capable, and a lot of generals who I name in the book who don't like me, but that's okay.
Obviously, the folks who are enforcing these new woke policies, do you think they understand that it will result in a weakened military?
I think a lot of them have Mark Milley disease in that, so he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under Trump, who famously sort of, saw himself as, he stayed there so that he could protect the world from Trump, right? And he was the one that had the calls with China and, wanted to make sure to let them know that we won't attack them. A lot of them have this view of, well, I'm here, I'll make it less bad. In fact, I talked to a Marine Corps general who was involved in some of the things that related to women in combat. And that was his exact view. He's like, but Pete, they were going to do it anyway. And they were going to do it anyway, so I tried to be there to try to make it more reflective of reality. And that was the sort of rationality that a lot of them had. Because if you stand up, if you throw your stars on the table, or if you push back, what will happen to you in a top-down organization run by political ideologues? You will get fired. You will get pushed out. And the more dangerous, the ickier spot, the underbelly of this, is that you don't get the fancy defense contract job later on. So we have a real problem inside our military-industrial complex amongst our general class, and their perverse incentives of the decisions that they make once they reach 1, 2, 3, 4-star general. If they play the game and go along with the political prerogatives, there's a sweet set of corporate boards to sit on afterwards where they get to make a lot of money after they serve. And a lot of them deserve to. I'm not against making money afterwards, but if you're specifically not doing the right thing because you don't want to rock the boat, and just going along to get along, and those things are wrong and you don't do anything about it, then the whole thing has the wrong perverse incentives. I mean, think about it. Look, the classic example that came up while I was writing this book, of course, is Afghanistan. How many people were fired for what happened in Afghanistan? 0 people. 0. And not even fired. Step down, take responsibility, nothing. They just peddle, it was the most successful airlift of all time. No, it's an absolute joke. The one guy that was fired was Stu Scheller, the Marine Corps lieutenant colonel, who stood up and said, this is wrong, and they threw the book at the guy. So this is not an institution built to hold people accountable right now. It's an institution built to answer the political prerogatives of ideologues. And that's why it was so hell-bent after George Floyd, after January 6th, to fight so-called patriot extremism. I mean, there was a whole extremism stand-down that Lloyd Austin and Mark Milley pushed throughout the military to try to find all those nasty racists in the military. And here's the sad part. Mark Milley knew the military wasn't racist. He knew it. He served for 30 years. He served at Fort Hood. How could he serve at Fort Hood, that racist base named after a Confederate general? Why didn't he speak up when he was Lieutenant Colonel Milley, or 1-star General Milley, about all the systemic racism in the ranks that he saw? Because he knew systemic racism doesn't exist in the military. It wasn't there when I was serving. Ask guys serving basically after the Korean War, after the Vietnam War for the most part. Once you have men and women, men of all backgrounds in trenches together, and you realize how capable they are and how much they are alike and have each other's back, that stuff goes away real quick. And it already had. So when a year after all this condemnation for systemic racism happened in the military finally went and did the study for Mark Milley. And it turns out, while the general population has an extremist percentage at 7% or whatever they say, the military has it 0.07. It's just not a thing. So they chased the boogeyman that Biden wanted, that systemic racism is a problem after George Floyd, by making the military look bad. And then obsessing over, I don't know, in the Air Force, we need to have more white pilots, or more non-white pilots. We have a pilot shortage in the Air Force. We can't get enough pilots. And yet they're discouraging white men and women from becoming pilots because they want a more diverse pilot corps. If there's one thing I want in my pilot, I just want them to know how to fly. I don't care what they look like. And when you're a general who thinks that way, how far off are you from the oath you swore to the Constitution? And why do I want to put my kids, my boys, in your hands, and then in the hands of political decision makers in Washington who are more concerned about the border of Ukraine than our own border? So how do those boys then end up getting used? So we have we can get to the solutions in a second, but the feedback loop and incentive structure for generals these days is slanted totally toward social justice and woke nonsense. And they know it. That training is far more important. When you get an assignment, you better finish your diversity, equity, inclusion training, and everybody better do it now. And the trans training, now. And then later we'll get to the rifle range. When that's your mentality, you're off base.
Yeah. I'm just a civilian, but it's hard for me to
You're a warrior.
hard for me to comprehend how Milley could be in contact with the CCP and keep his job. Can you imagine in World War II if one of our allied generals had been caught in some sort of collusion with Nazi power structure, leadership structure? He'd be court-martialed for treason, wouldn't he?
Yes. I would say, I'm not giving him a pass on this. If the president gives you a directive to reach out to your Chinese counterparts to make sure there's no confusion, that's something a commander-in-chief has the latitude to do.
Yes.
Or communicate with your Russian counterpart as a result. When you go behind the back of your commander-in-chief so as to communicate with the CCP and let them know, don't worry, we won't give them access to the buttons, you've committed treason.
Yeah.
And yet he sees that as the highest and most patriotic duty he's ever committed. That's a sense of how some in the officer corps, and so much of it does go back to Trump derangement syndrome, and they're not used to working with someone who actually, first of all, respects the military and the use of the military, doesn't want to use the military unless he absolutely has to, and uses the power of the office to deter those conflicts. I mean, telling Vladimir Putin, if you invade Ukraine, we're coming to Moscow. Or to the Taliban, if you kill an American soldier, I'm gonna bomb your house. Like, do we really believe Trump was gonna bomb Moscow? Probably not. But if Putin thought with 10% that he might, he didn't. That's who I want as a commander-in-chief.
Yeah. Because didn't, am I mistaken, didn't Putin attack the Crimea during Obama's years? And then nothing after that till Biden.
Yeah, all that Russian collusion scared them off. I mean, it's amazing. Anything they accuse you of, they're utterly guilty of. And so his relationship and sort of the mutual respect that Trump shows to foreign leaders on the world stage is very smart. It doesn't mean he has to like Kim Jong-un, doesn't mean he has to like Vladimir Putin, doesn't mean he has to like Xi Jinping, but he respects that they're advancing their nation's interests, and they respect that he's advancing our nation's interests. And there's enough uncertainty, enough of a Trump curveball there, because they think he might be a little boop boop. But he's not, so that's useful, and you play that to your advantage. And time again, it prevented wars in a good way. And under Biden, you have this predictable groupthink of globalist UN bootlicking morons that they send Kamala Harris actually to Ukraine to try to dissuade Vladimir Putin from invading. And then 5 days later, he's like, fire up the tanks. I mean, we're a joke in that context, unfortunately.
I love this paragraph. The current state of the military is careerism. It no longer centers on our core task to win wars. Indeed, the ethos is, where's my next command? How am I going to advance myself? That pushes our leaders towards protecting careers, and we never filter out the turds. My daughter wasn't sure I should say that from the pulpit, but
Sorry about
it's your
that.
words. It's your words.
It's my words, yes. Sinner saved by grace. That's the institutional problem that exists. And frankly, we also, even in my time, the legalism and the legal aspect was creeping into it. We let our lawyers run wars. I mean, I tell a story in there as a platoon leader of a JAG officer who we had an unfortunate nickname for, who will not be spoken of in here. who briefed my platoon in Iraq in 2005, you know, hey, if you see a guy with a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG in the street, but he's not yet pointing at you, can you shoot him? And he was like, my guys were like, absolutely. And he was like, no. You know, you can't, you have to wait until he's pointing it at you. And I remember having to pull my guys out of that briefing and being like, yo, we're not doing that. Okay? We're coming home alive. And we knew our commanders had our back in that context. The problem is when you've got Biden or Obama and you don't know that they have your context. So a big part of what I worked with the Trump administration was pardons for warfighters who were thrown under the bus because of political leaders who didn't like the way that they killed the enemy. And I don't know about you, but I'm not in the business of second guessing from here the tough decisions an Army Ranger or a Green Beret or a Navy SEAL is making on the battlefield for us. Doesn't mean we're perfect. Doesn't mean we condone, doesn't mean we try to kill civilians. But when bad things happen in the fog of war, I'm gonna have the back of Americans. And Donald Trump always did too.
Yeah. We're coming up on the break, and we'll have a lot of your questions for Pete to respond to when we come back. But we're going to get to some solutions, but maybe to hint at the solutions. You said in your book, quote, the current woke victory over the military is broad but not deep. What do you mean by that? And is it sort of a glimmer of hope?
It is a glimmer of hope because there are a lot, like I said, the top down and the bottom up. There's a core group of men and women. And I use men in the book, you know, find the betrayal of the men who keep us free. Because it is, I write in there somewhere in the book, America's wars have all been fought and won by normal men. Prove me wrong. It's always, I mean, women have made amazing contributions on the home front and on the battlefield, but the American military has been staffed by normal men who just did their duty for generations. And what we went and did is the military went and pulled a Bud Light. It did. It tried to cater to non-traditional constituencies, and in the process, it offended all those boys from Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Wisconsin who always just wanted to go, you know, do what their dad did and go, you know, be men and fight for their country. Problem is, there aren't enough like lesbians in San Francisco to man the 82nd Airborne. And so it's not working. But you can change that really quickly because the core of our military and the core of our country, I still believe this today, even with all the woke left is done in our educational institutions, there are boys and there are men and there are women in this country who love this country, who fear God and are willing to put the uniform on to defend it for the rest of us. They're out there. I know them. You know them. They're my boys. They're your boys. They're your kids. They're your grandkids. They're out there. You have to speak to them and show them a military that's befitting their service. And a new commander-in-chief, you fire the Secretary of Defense, you fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, you find any of those generals that were involved in any of that woke nonsense, and you fire them. You just say you're done, or you push them out. You promote men and women inside who have fidelity only to the Constitution. You return the standards, I don't care what year, pick your year. The standards of the Army are now back to 1995. Whatever they were then is what they are today. You don't push other prerogatives. You get rid of all the Marxist nonsense, the DEI, CRT inside our military academies, inside the military. And then you hire whoever made the movie Top Gun Maverick, you hire them to make the new ads. Okay? And I think you would see young men and women say, I'm prepared to defend my country.
Yeah.
They need a commander-in-chief that they're proud of, that they want to serve under. It's going to take more than one term, but in one term you could start to steer it in the right direction because it is a top-down entity. You obviously can't just do it with one edict at the top, but it's different than education in that way. You can make a lot of change pretty quick.
Yeah. We're going to go to break. Please take advantage of the different organizations we have in the lobby. We'll come back from a 15-minute, hold if you don't mind. We're going to come back from a 15-minute break with your questions and try to get to some of the rest of my questions. I've got 3 pages left here. But we'd love to have you come back. Please, we've got to do something about Christians getting involved in this upcoming election. We cannot, listen, seriously, I don't know what other pastors you know, what other Christians you know, but we cannot afford in the state of Washington another 4 years like the last 4 years. And we can't afford in this nation another 4 years like the last 4 years. And so if those 900,000 Christians that didn't vote in the last major election can somehow get mobilized and disregard what Andy Stanley and John Piper and all of those folks are saying out there about Christian nationalism, and realize that we have your vote is a stewardship, just like your finances. Let me speak on behalf of your pastor, if you're from another church. Your finances are from God in your life you're a steward over those. You don't own them, they come from the Lord. So your tithe and your offerings to ministry are part of your stewardship. Your vote is part of your stewardship. And if you just forget the candidates even, if you just looked at the platform of the 2 options we have right now in America, there's no Christian that has any right voting for anything the left stands for. It really, and so, please talk to the people you can talk to, but let's move the needle in this next election, and then pray God undermine every dominion machine that's able to be tampered with, in Jesus' name. God bless you.
Welcome back, everybody. That is the most nonplussed, non-excited. Come on, everybody. Okay, so here's a little trick. You guys are all here. So first of all, let me recognize that you guys are on time. But you hear that? Is all that chatter in the lobby? It's because they don't know that we're back. So what I need us to do is clap and cheer really loud, like they're gonna miss something, and then watch how many people come in. So 1, 2, 3. Literally everybody in the lobby just turned around. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to tackle before we have Pete and Pastor Alec back out. Mailing slide. If you would like to be added to the mailing list, please visit apologiaforum.com. If that's too much to remember, just take a picture with your phone of the QR code you see on the right, and you'll be added to the list. So just to be really, really clear, when you get added to this email list, like we all need another email in our inbox. However, for Apologia Forum, it's literally only emails about upcoming guests. So you'll know in advance of who's coming, the dates that are scheduled. I promise you the only emails you'll get from Apologia Forum are strictly about Apologia and who's coming and all of that. Speaking of who's coming, we're really excited about Kaylee McEnany. I'll cover it in a second, but I just wanted to say the next Apologia in November will be our last one for the year. As December is a really big month for Westgate Chapel, I encourage you to come to our Christmas concerts. Let me put it like this. The Apologia in November could be the last Apologia forever. That would be really, really sad. And the reason I set this up is the only way Apologia exists is through donations from you guys, quite frankly. To get people like Pete Hegseth, Pete's awesome. He gives us like the family discount because he's been here a few times. You heard him, he said it's like home. But to get the caliber of guests that we continue to get, it costs money. And honestly, every year we're like, can we even pull this thing off again? So this is my formal plea to you all, that we would love you to support Apologia. You're here, you got to be here for free. We all get to be here for free, which is amazing. So just ask yourself, to attend an event like this, how much would you pay for a ticket? That's what I would say is the number. That's not the Holy Spirit, that's Michael Wydell putting that in your mind. But the point is, you can either go to westgatechapel.com, you can donate there and just tag it with Apologia. There are little black boxes outside of each doorway. If you wanted to drop cash, there are envelopes on the back of every chair. You could just write Apologia, drop it in there. Or again, you could take a picture of the QR code and donate as well. With that, let's not make November our last Apologia, but it is an incredible one. Clearly, there is a lot going on in the nation, and November is an enormous month. You guys all know that, you're here. No matter what the outcome is, first of all, we trust that the Lord, in the Lord's providence and in His omniscience, He knows what's going to happen and is going to orchestrate this all. However, that doesn't negate your responsibility as a steward of your vote in November, which is really cool that we have Kayleigh McEnany coming in November 17th. Write it in your diary, put it in your calendar. So with that, let's take a look at the video and then we'll invite Pete and Pastor Alec back out.
So, last night ABC had a choice. They could be credible, solid, probing, fair debate moderators, or they could be partisan activists. And they chose the latter. And I sat there watching this debate wondering, where's the question about the tie-breaking vote for Kamala on inflation, on the American Rescue Plan? I sat there thinking to myself, where's the question about taxpayer-funded gender transition surgeries from illegal immigrants? It didn't exist. Where's the question about her running mate, babies born alive after abortions being left to die before changing the reporting requirements? And we'll scroll this as well, where are the questions about every single one of these policies, Harris, these radical policies? I believe one or two were mentioned casually. None of Harris's past policies mentioned. The American people, Emily, I believe, wanted to see
that's not what the focus
how
group showed.
They would lower costs at the grocery store, how Kamala Harris would lower housing costs, how she would secure the border, how she would end two wars that, by the way, were created on her watch. They weren't thinking about cats and white supremacy. They got no answers from Kamala Harris on that. We saw a debate hosted by left-wing activists. We'll see if it moves the needle. One thing it did not do was restore faith in the media.
Just like I got all the people in the lobby to come back, I need to get our guests to come out. So would you welcome Pete Hegseth and Pastor Alec? There we go.
Well, you guys sent a whole bunch of great questions. We're going to try to move as quickly as we can. What are your thoughts on today's events regarding the second assassination attempt on President Trump? What's going on with Secret Service? And how much do the woke policies affect protection of our presidents?
Great question. What's the count now? 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, 1 Mar-a-Lago raid, and 2 assassination attempts? I mean, what do you expect when you call someone a threat to democracy and as bad as Hitler? When I look at what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, I don't know everything that went down, and we're not learning a lot of what went down, and that's disturbing enough. But what's quite evident is that it's the best analogy is, well, oops, we left the front door open. Someone happened to come in and steal everything. And that kind of complacency, intentional or otherwise, is indicative of how they view Trump. They don't give him the type of coverage that he deserves, and today is an example of that. If Joe Biden was golfing at that golf course, they would have had the whole perimeter secured. But because he's a former president, even though do you think anyone's going after Joe Biden right now? Thankfully, no one's going after Joe Biden right now. But we know people are going after Donald Trump. And yet they continue to treat him like, oh, he's just a former president, like they guard him like they guard Jimmy Carter right now. It's almost because the institution itself despises him. I can tell you this from knowing people inside the Secret Service, there is a war on warriors version of the Secret Service as well. DEI, CRT, the gender stuff, it's all laid bare. Talk to Dan Bongino, talk to anybody else. It's just as bad inside the Secret Service, which is how you end up getting a 5'4" female guarding a 6'3" president. It's all of our institutions, and I say a prayer for Donald Trump. Say a prayer for our country. Thank God, twice it's been averted, but could they try again? Of course. And it's indicative of what a threat they see him as well, obviously.
Yeah. You knew this was coming. Do you think dogs and cats are being eaten in Springfield, Ohio?
They're eating the cats and they're eating the dogs. Come on, you've seen all the memes I've seen too. Listen, the media wants to call it all unconfirmed and untrue out the gate without doing any of their own evidence, because if they actually engaged with the subject, they would be engaging with the reality that local communities across the country have been devastated by an influx of illegals that are totally unchecked at our border, and they want to tell us it makes our lives better. But in actuality, when you import Haiti into a small town in Ohio, you might just have a different set of values. To include the satanic forms of worship that occur there, which Jack Brewer, who was a friend of mine, who spent 15 years there, validates openly. To include different culinary choices also, which may lead to people missing their household pets. And why is the burden always on me to try to find a way to uncover a tape that proves something that CNN and MSNBC will deny anyway? When what J.D. Vance and everybody else are saying is, I'm simply hearing from constituents who are voicing their concern that our schools, that our communities, that our streets are being changed by a group of people, regardless of what their race is or anything like that, who have a different set of values, and we were never consulted on whether Springfield, Ohio should be that type of place. Yeah. They don't want to have that conversation. They just want to flood the country with tens of millions of people from the third world and pretend like everything's going to be fine. Yeah. And Aurora, Colorado, and Springfield, Ohio, and other places like that are the moments when the rest of the world pays attention. So, I've seen, they probably are, yeah.
Yeah. What seems to be being ignored, like you just said, is 20,000 people dumped into a city of 40,000. I mean, I went to university there. It's not a very big town.
And when the residents speak up, the residents are the problem? The residents are the racists? The people that rely on government services but can't get those government services because they're inundated by, they say, folks here with a legal status because of an asylum status, and you can say what you want about that. Why was that given? Why were they dumped there? But we know there are secret flights and movements of illegals all across our country into places known and unknown where communities are dealing with this. And Biden wants to ignore it. We know it's happening. You just have to be willing to say it. And thankfully, Donald Trump is willing to say it. He just says it in his own way. And we love him for it.
What are your thoughts on the presidential debate?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything Kayleigh McEnany said about the presidential debate. And she's going to be phenomenal. She's a wonderful human being. And you will love hearing from her. First of all, she didn't say anything new. You didn't learn anything about her. Everybody already knew. Most people already have a baked-in impression of Donald Trump. They're mostly, if they're not voting for him and they're an independent, they're mostly looking for an excuse to hold their nose and vote for him because maybe of an impression they have of him. She said nothing to quell people's concerns about the economy. She clearly doesn't know anything about the economy, clearly can't actually speak to what's happened on immigration. His disposition, I think, was, he properly prepared for his disposition. It's just, as everyone's talked about, he took the bait. He took the bait on, crowd size, or took the debate on John McCain, or took the bait on his dad giving him $400 million, which is not true. But when she said it, you knew it was something he was going to respond to. And that's one of the things I actually love about Trump. You can complain all you want. He's not a guy who got where he got because he was coached by political consultants. He got where he got because he has a gut feeling, he knows what he believes, and he'll say it. That's why he's always been the see something, say something president. He's the guy that will say what the rest of us are thinking, but he's got the cojones to actually say it. And so, did he win? Did he lose? That's what we talk about in cable news. But the reality is she got no bump from this poll. And she says she wants to debate again because clearly she didn't get what she thought she wanted out of the first debate. And my kids are calling me, but I'm not going to answer right now. Sorry.
Do you think polls are trustworthy?
I think Trump is polling better right now than he did in 2016. Absolutely. Because there's always a hidden vote for Trump support, even still today, of people who talk to pollsters and hold back that. Kamala Harris got the bump. She got all the bumps every bump she's gotten, she's already gotten, meaning she got that honeymoon period where people who didn't like Joe were willing to go to her for all the historic reasons or whatever, just because she's not Joe. But it's all stabilized. And I think the key aspect of this election is the gut feeling people have about how their life was for 4 years versus how their life has been for 3.5. That definitely cuts for Trump across political boundaries. So the only poll that matters is how many ballots each side can pull out, and I hate saying that. But in 2016, especially in 2020, it was an election of voters versus ballots, and it's all going to come down to how much the Trump campaign can mobilize ballots and early voters in a way that the left does, while guarding the ballot box at the same time to make sure it's a fair election.
Yeah. If Trump is elected, what are the chances he'll cancel the Department of Education? And if it's canceled, what will that mean for schools around the country?
It's long overdue. Ronald Reagan wanted to do it and never was able to. It was created by Jimmy Carter at the behest of the unions as a giveaway for his election. Donald Trump has said, the first time he said it actually was in an interview with Will and Rachel and I on Fox and Friends Weekend, where he said, "I will abolish the Department of Education." He said it again in the debate and elsewhere. I think he will. And I think what you do, the simple way to do it is the Department of Education is a federal department, which means the executive has oversight over it. So if the commander-in-chief or the president says, "I don't want a Department of Education anymore," you can say that. The executive can effectively say that. Now, Congress's job is to fund that department or not. And so if you're Congress, all you'd say is, let's just block grant that money to the states. So the money that goes to all the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. can otherwise just be sent to the states and let the states serve that function. Now, a lot of states will use that money poorly, unfortunately, but that's the system of federalism, where I'd rather have states making those decisions than a federal bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. So I hope he does. He needs to end the Department of Education. He says he will. I hope he does.
When Mike Pompeo was here, he said that if Trump gets in, there are thousands of jobs in the DOD and in the three-letter departments that need to be X'd.
For sure. Start with those 87,000 IRS agents.
Yeah.
I can't remember whose idea it was. It's not mine, but if you're going to, you see what Elon Musk did at Twitter? He had to fire, 80% of the company? And he still wasn't able to get rid of all the wokesters, but you had to change a culture. If you really want to reduce the size and scope of the federal government, tinkering is not going to get it done. So, but you also have to be completely arbitrary in how you do it. So I like an idea, something along the lines of, okay, if you work for the federal government and your social security number ends in 4, 8, 3, or 1, you're fired. No, I mean, you can't be accused of any bias in that scenario. And you think a 40%, 50% haircut of federal employees wouldn't do us good at this point?
Yeah.
Of course it would. I'm not saying they'll do that, but we're at a point where you've got to take some pretty bold steps, because the old idea of reform is not going to change anything. Yes.
Yeah. Do you think there'll be a second debate?
I do not think there'll be a second debate. I would like to see a second debate because I think she'll coach up again for 2 weeks, which will take her off the trail for 2 weeks. I think he'll be even more prepared for the way And you can't get a more deceptive moderator than what you got with ABC.
Yeah.
So that's the most important thing. You have to make sure you have something that's even remotely fair, because that was, and then a lot of you have seen the affidavit today that's out there about whether or not questions were provided in advance or not. We'll find out if that was true or not, or if there were parameters. But you have to find a way to have somewhat of a fair platform. I would love to see it, but I don't think it's going to happen.
So there's a current situation with Biden giving the UK giving Ukraine long-range offensive weapons. Of course, Putin's come out and said what he's going to say. What are your thoughts on that situation?
My thought is long-range missiles fired, Western supplied long-range missiles fired into Russia has, the only thing that's going to cause Russia to do is expand the war even further, which makes it more likely that it expands in a way that directly involves America even more than it does today. Do you remember at the beginning of this conflict how hard, well, first of all, they said they were going to deter the conflict, and they didn't. And then they were trying very hard to say, this is the Ukraine's fight, not ours. And then every time they'd say, we're not going to supply something, then it was maybe, and then it was yes. And so we're slow walking our way into a wider conflict, into a world war. Now we're authorizing NATO states all around Russia, which was Russia's complaint to begin with. Listen, I'm not saying Russia's an innocent actor in this. They're not at all. They are an aggressor. I've called this war from the beginning Putin's "give me my stuff back" war. That's what it is. He wants to reestablish effectively the orbit of the USSR. But the hawks and the neocons run around saying, we have to stop Russia now, or they're going to go all the way to the UK or to France. Putin's not taking Western Europe. He's not interested in that. That's not what, and so I don't have to throw everything in the kitchen sink at Putin to defend France. Poland's going to take care of itself if they were to make that. It's almost as if the international globalist defense types want a wider war. And it feels like at every turn they're pushing to do so. So, no, I think we should find a way to end the war. It won't be advantageous for either side, but an ongoing conflict only makes it more likely. Eventually, you're going to hear some politician peddling, well, you know what we need? We need some boots on the ground. If we had some American boots on the ground. How many times have we heard that before? Yeah. Tell that to a Vietnam vet. Tell that to anybody else. We've heard it before. We don't need to do it again.
Yeah. Okay. How does the IDF effectively deploy women versus the DIE-driven U.S. military policy?
That's a good question. So I think the Israeli Defense Forces, I know the Israeli Defense Forces employ women into their military more so out of necessity. I mean, we forget how small Israel is. Israel's the size of New Jersey. It's got the population the size effectively of New Jersey. And they're surrounded by the Middle East by countries much larger than them who want to wipe them off the map. If that's the case, then you're going to have mandatory service for men and for women, and for men, especially into your older ages, the ability in the reserves to be pulled back in to defend your nation. And they proudly do it. But when you talk to the IDF, yes, they have gender-integrated units out of necessity, but they're also careful in elite units about where they do it and where they don't. But it's done in a way that doesn't erode standards, and where quotas aren't the goal, it's just the reality. Whereas in the United States military, we've got plenty of men willing to serve if we recruit them properly, respect them properly, and then a lot of women we need to serve as well, but they can serve in different roles. I'm not saying a woman can't be a fighter pilot or an Apache pilot or a medic. Like, I'm not worried about that. I'm talking about carrying rucksacks, hauling men off the battlefield, burning vehicles where you're pulling people, physical tasks where lung capacity and bone density and muscle strength matter. In those places, let the men do the deal. And if you want to have one standard and a woman can meet it, fine. But it better be right here. And there might be one or two women out there that can meet that standard, and if so, that's great. But don't erode those standards. So I respect what Israel, most countries, and we write about this in the book, that employ women soldiers are dictatorships that have a desire to do that out of control of the population.
If Harris gets elected, what is our military going to look like in the next 4 years?
Maybe that's the point. I don't know. I mean, I think I changed the rest. I probably changed the last chapter of my book, which recommends service to my boys with the caveat that if, you're not yet of serving age, so if it's really bad when you get there, I'd probably recommend against it. I just think everything you're seeing would go on hyperdrive. There'd be no self-reflection about whether these policies are working or not. They're not going to go backwards on these things. You're going to have more time to squeeze out the middle, which is still the core. Your senior NCOs and your mid-grade officers, which are ready at the flip of a switch to go back to the way the military did operate, would be squeezed out as well, and you'd have a further thinning of the ranks. I think you'd see even more of a recruiting crisis. By the way, the Army missed its goals by 25%. You know what they did the next year? Just reduced their goal by 25%. So they could say they met their goal, right? Now, what you could end up seeing is conscription, or what you could end up seeing is illegals allowed to join the military. I mean, this is what has happened in late stage empires over time, right? You get conscription of the population, mandatory service, or you get foreign service in your military because the domestic population is unwilling or incapable. And we also have a huge obesity problem with kids. Like 77% of American kids are unqualified to join the military. Too fat, criminal record, drug use, you name it. So, I mean, that's been the case for a while, so that's not the reason for the recruiting issues, but yeah, we've got some problems there.
If Trump is elected, what are the chances that he'll get to actually correct some of these things?
I think a lot. I think he rebuilt the military. He rebuilt he unleashed the military. Remember ISIS? I mean, we were told they couldn't be defeated. They were here to stay, and Trump just let the special operators just throw them into a meat grinder. And like 2 months later, ISIS was gone. I mean, they're still trying to reconstitute themselves all over the place, but when you let us stack bodies, we stack bodies really well. And that's what that's the only thing our enemies actually respect and understand, is dead bodies and crying widows. And that's the tragic reality of war. But that's if you want wars to go on forever, fight them the way we fought them. Fight them the way Israel's fighting against Hamas. Keep pulling them back so that they can't go into this area or they can't take out the enemy. That's why Iraq and Afghanistan never ended. We fought these wars with one hand tied behind our back. And then we wonder why we have these endless wars. It's because the lawyers and others prevent us from fighting the way that we absolutely need to. So, yes, he could change it. It wouldn't all change immediately, but I also think a lot of the looming conflicts would be pulled back, like in Ukraine, so the prospect of a larger war and the use of our military hopefully would diminish more as well.
What do you think about China's current plans for Taiwan? Do you have any sense of whether that's imminent or whether we're going to get a reprieve?
I think China's time, sorry, I'm just making sure my thing doesn't go off again. The kid's calling again, okay. I mean, when it comes to Taiwan, China's hell-bent on taking it. The question is, how much of a porcupine can we make it? How difficult could we make it for them to delay that strategic calculus? They look at our weakness in Afghanistan, they look what happens in Ukraine, and they want to move. And they also believe the longer they wait, here's the scary part about China. They think the longer they wait, the better their chances get. There's a reason they haven't moved yet. We're building a military and funding a military that's basically fighting and reflects yesterday's war. There's some pivot toward the Pacific and all that, but because of the way we procure weapon systems, we're basically building and refunding a military that looks like what it used to look like. Whereas China is specifically building a military designed to defeat the American military. That is, I mean, in a world of hypersonic, take this hypothetical. We have 10 aircraft carriers, which are our power projection platforms. It's how we move, it's how we maintain strategic advantage around the globe. China has built an arsenal of hypersonic missiles. And that when you war game it out, what do they do with those hypersonic missiles in the first 15 minutes of a conflict? Target every one of our aircraft carriers. So what if our strategic capability to deploy air power is diminished immediately, and then you're trying to defend the Taiwan Strait as they make that move? Now, we'd have a world war if that happened in the process, and it's not clear that China wants to unleash that. But a crazy stat that came out of another book that I reference here too is that over the last 10 to 15 years, the Pentagon has a perfect record in its war games against China. You know, when you do war games and you script out how it might go, America loses every time. Every time. They are hell-bent on regional domination, eventually global domination. They think the last 100 years has been embarrassing for China, that they were left behind and humiliated in a way that their culture should not sustain, a very proud culture. And they will go for Taiwan when the time is right. They think we're committing cultural suicide. They're helping us do it. Doing it to our kids, doing it with elite capture, doing it with drugs, doing it with debt, with pharmaceuticals, you name it. China feels like we're killing ourselves and they're getting stronger, which makes an invasion more likely. We just don't know when.
Is there one branch of the military that's more or less woke than another? You might have already alluded to this with regards to the Marines, but what are your thoughts?
The Navy and the Air Force is pretty bad. I mean, not surprisingly, the closer you get to the tip of the spear, the less woke you are usually. So, you know, your reserve and your guard units are more likely to tinker with some of this stuff because war is less likely. Or your service support or combat service support, your logistics, your cooks, your engineer, the things that are, the further you get from trigger pullers, the more it's easy to do the briefings and make sure you hold these bifurcated standards. The closer you get to trigger pullers, the less woke. That's why my advice to my boys is if you serve, I hope you would join an elite unit. You know, try to join the Army Rangers or the MARSOC or the Navy SEALs or the Green Berets. Because when life or death is truly at stake, a lot of that stuff washes away in that moment. So I think closer to combat, the less woke it is, but the closer to combat, the more of an impact it has. So, I mean, I saw when I had leaders that were chosen for our unit who didn't deserve to be there, who were totally incapable, how more combat ineffective it made us. And that is happening in units right now in very legit and direct ways. And we'll find out in the next shooting war. That's the scary part. The next time we have an actual peer-to-peer conflict. Because right now, a lot of the reason we sit safely around the world is because there's really highly trained elite units of men who do really dangerous things in the middle of the night that we never read about. And they keep enemies at bay, and we don't have to worry about it. When we have to mobilize again, that will be the question about how capable we really are.
My son, who's with me tonight, is 17 and a cadet major and the commanding officer of the Kent Marine Corps JROTC company. His heart's desire is to become a Marine. What words of wisdom do you have for him as he decides to join?
Well, I salute him. I hope he does. Because even though I'm very concerned about the state of the military, like I said, we only have one. So what are we gonna do, just abandon it? And our patriots don't join, they don't try to be a part of the solution. So if you're inclined to wanna serve your nation and the cloth of your nation, I would be proud to have, I will salute you and be the first to thank you and say I admire that choice in this dangerous world. Just go in with your eyes wide open. Just go in knowing that, you know, the military today values certain types of people different than certain other types of people. It's sad to say, but if you're a white, male, Christian, heterosexual, they're not as interested in seeing you rise as other people in other categories. And that's sad inside a meritocracy, but it just kind of is the case. If you can be a part of returning it to meritocracy and lethality and being a part of the solution, then do it. Because we need a patriot inside a bunk next to the wokester to either change that person's view or at least be a part of preventing the entire system from being corrupted.
As we get ready to wrap up tonight, do you see a way out of the current mess we're in?
Well, all things are possible through God. I really do. Listen, I mean, I pray for revival in this country. I think it's the only, I really, you can yell on TV all day long, you can vote, 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 you can mobilize people all you want, but we are not gonna vote our way out of this problem. We're gonna get our way out of this problem on our knees. And I think the first thing, if Donald Trump is elected, the first thing I would love to see him do is announce a national day of repentance. And I'm going through the whole Bible. Going through the whole Bible this year in a chronological way, and it's amazing. I'm in September 15th, and I'm still in the Old Testament. We're in the prophets. But it's amazing. The same sentiment of nations exists today. Like when we have turned our back on God, and as a result, he has given us unto ourselves, which is our sinful and corrupt nature, and things have devolved into chaos, into sin. And at each individual church, each pastor needs to take their stand with their kids, with their grandkids, in their congregation, in their communities, in their schools, in their churches, and say, we're gonna be a part of fighting to take back this nation. So listen, I feel and see the exact same things that you do. I take heart in what I can affect first, which is my leadership of my family as a husband, as a Christ follower, as a leader of kids, trying to pass that to the next generation, and then doing everything I can to inside their school, inside our church, inside our community to reinforce that, and we need to just keep amplifying that. Because it's never been the 50% of Americans that change the trajectory. It's the 1 or 2 or 3% of faithful Americans that put their shoulder to the plow. They know where north is, they know what truth is, and they fight for it. And it's a scary, scary moment, because we're in uncharted waters. We're trying to keep a country while simultaneously rejecting God and training an entire generation of young people to hate that country, or think that that country is a bad place, that it's only should be seen as a country, built on stolen land and on the backs of slaves by a bunch of white racist guys who are, misogynists and patriarchs, and it all needs to be turned upside down. That was my other book about what they're doing to kids. Nations don't try to perpetuate themselves by telling everybody in that nation how bad they are. We have to reverse that in our schools, in our families, in our homes. It's shrinking the size of the federal government isn't gonna fix these things. These are soul things. This is spiritual warfare stuff. And that's why I'm so encouraged by churches like this that stand up. Our revolution was, my kids go to a school named after Jonathan Edwards, who's a long-lost Presbyterian minister. But we forget this, and I recently read a bio of his. And there was a revival in America in the 1750s that was the predicate to the revolution, and it was led in the pulpits. It was American preachers who revived faith in the country that were a part of sparking the belief in liberty of the 1770s. I pray we're on the precipice of that in our nation too. It's dark times, but light can come in anywhere.
Yeah. I've been in this country since 1966, in the days of Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather came later, but I don't know that I've ever lived in a time when you can turn on television, turn on cable news, and see people like yourself. Of course, now we've had a chance to know you personally, but to realize that with a national platform and a national voice, God has people like you, Kayleigh McEnany, Harris Faulkner, who you say is just absolutely the real deal. And regardless of what Fox's occasional weak points may be, we look at you on a regular basis and are grateful that at that national platform, he's got people like you who have a heart for God and a heart for righteousness.
Can I say one thing on that?
Yeah.
I will say, I appreciate that. I will also say that when I think about that, my job is really easy. I get paid to give my opinion on television. My employer knows I'm gonna say things that some people will like and that some people will not like. And as a result, I'll get criticism for that. My only responsibility is to be bold, to be honest, to not hold back, to speak, to say the things that I believe in my heart, and my mind, and my soul, unapologetically, as a representation of other people that feel the same way. You have a much more difficult job, and I sincerely mean this. Because right now, we live in a country, you know this, if you can't say with your mouth what you're thinking in your mind, you're not actually free. You're not. And the left and the mob, or whatever you want to call them, they want to shame and push you into silence. It's a lot harder if you're a teacher or a nurse or a line worker, or you name the job, whatever, and you want to speak out on Facebook, or you want to speak out at your school board meeting, or you want to volunteer. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where your employer looks at you and says, well, why would you say that? I urge you, try in every way you can to find that courage, to muster that courage in the public square, to speak out. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to call you a bunch of names, and then you're going to lose some friends. But you know what you're going to do? You're going to gain a lot more of like-minded people who are encouraged by your boldness and your courage. So listen, I'm encouraged by Trump's boldness and his willing to speak out, and it motivates me to say, hey, I'm never going to back down and equivocate and be afraid to say exactly what I think. I commend you on the front lines in your daily life to try to do the same. Yeah. Your kids will see that, because we got to this point because Christians and conservatives and patriots gave just another inch, or we just didn't comment on that one, or we let that slide. And here we are 100 years later, and we're in a box. And we got to be bold if we're going to get out of it.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here tonight. Your presence here speaks of your courage, and I pray over you God's blessing. May He, like Pete just said, give us all a boldness in the months, in the weeks between now and the election. And then, Lord willing, we'll gather together. And like Pete said backstage, Kaylee McEnany on November the 14th, we may not know the results of the election. Oh, sorry.
Let's hope.
17th.
Let's hope.
17th. But we got a lot of praying to do, a lot of calling on God, and a lot of work to do. So let's head out of here, roll up our sleeves. God bless you. Thank you for being here tonight and for making tonight possible. Good night.
Thank you.
God bless you.